Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozark Mountain. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places, what times of day or night these documented accounts. The Ozark Mountains stretch across Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the very edge of Kansas, a vast highland region of dense forests, hidden valleys, and labyrinthine cave system. In 1875, most of this territory remained largely unmapped, a place where a traveler could disappear without trace. According to county records from Newton County, Arkansas, between 1871 and 1876, no fewer than 27 travelers were reported missing along the old trading routes that wound through the southern Ozarks. At the time, local authorities attributed these disappearances to the hazards of frontier travel, wild animals, treacherous terrain, or perhaps hostile encounters with strangers. The truth, as uncovered through fragments of documentation recovered in 1963, suggests something far more methodical. The first official records of unusual occurrences in the region date back to September 1870, when a postal carrier named Jeremiah Wilkins noted in his route log several homesteads along the old Springfield Trail had reported travelers seeking lodging who never reached their next destination. Wilkins' notes mention that these disappearances occurred primarily in the vicinity of Whispering Valley, a narrow passage approximately 18 miles northeast of what would later become Jasper, Arkansas. His observations, preserved in Postal Service archive, represent the earliest documented awareness of a pattern that would continue unnoticed by authorities for nearly 6 years. According to his notes, dated October 17, 1870, residents had taken to marking safe routes for travelers with distinctive notches in trees, 3 horizontal cuts that locals called safe passage signs. Conversely, certain trails were designated as unsafe, though Wilkins does not elaborate on the specific concerns beyond noting that locals speak of sounds that do not belong in these woods, particularly after sundown. In the autumn of 1875, a land surveyor named Thomas Halverston was dispatched from Springfield to map portions of the White River Valley. What makes these initial reports particularly notable is Wilkins's mention of local superstitions that had begun to develop among the scattered homesteaders of the region. His official logs, preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, detail his encounter with a remote homestead some 15 miles northeast of what is now Jasper, Arkansas. Halverston noted what he called a crude but substantial cabin situated in a clearing that appeared unnaturally devoid of undergrowth. He described meeting 2 brothers, Elijah and Silas Thornton, who offered him shelter for the night. According to Halverston's meticulous surveying record, the Thornton property was situated in a peculiar geographic location, a small valley surrounded on 3 sides by limestone ridges, accessible only through a narrow passage that followed a seasonal creek. The natural acoustics of this formation, as Halverston noted, created an unusual sound-dampening effect. He wrote, "One's voice seems not to carry beyond a few yards in this hollow. The brothers claim this quality makes for peaceful nights, though I find the unnatural silence disquieting." What follows in Halverston's journal is the first documented account of what would later be called the Thornton Hollow case. Halverston wrote that the brothers were hospitable in a manner that suggested unfamiliarity with social custom. They provided him with a meal of unidentifiable stewed meat and repeatedly inquired about his intended route and whether anyone knew of his precise whereabouts. Halverston noted that the cabin walls were adorned with an unusual collection of personal effects, pocket watches of varying designs, several different walking sticks, and what he described as a collection of boots far too numerous for 2 men. The brothers told Halverston they had settled in the region in 1869, having relocated from Tennessee following the war. According to his notes, Elijah, the elder brother, did most of the talking, while Silas, described as a man of imposing stature but childlike demeanor, watched with what Halverston called uncommon intensity. The surveyor recorded that the brothers claimed to sustain themselves through hunting, small-scale farming, and occasional trade with travelers passing through the region. Halverston left the following morning, apparently unharmed, though he noted a peculiar interaction as he departed. The elder brother, Elijah, insisted on escorting him to what he called the safe path. Halverston recorded that Elijah seemed to take particular interest in the surveyor's equipment, asking repeatedly about its value and whether Halverston was expected to report back on a particular date. As they reached a fork in the trail, Halverston noted that Elijah pointed to the left path and said, "Many who take the right path find it leads them places they don't return from." When Halverston inquired about this cryptic warning, Elijah reportedly smiled and said only, "These mountains have a way of keeping what enters." 3 weeks later, Halverston submitted his survey report, no official mention of the Thornton. This omission might have relegated the encounter to obscurity were it not for a personal letter Halverston sent to his brother in St. Louis, discovered among family papers in 1950. In this correspondence, dated November 18, 1875, Halverston confessed to a growing unease of his encounter. He wrote of waking in the night to find the younger brother, Silas, standing motionless at the foot of his cot, simply watching him. More disturbing was Halverston's recollection of a cellar door, secured with multiple iron locks, from which he believed he heard sounds of a human nature, though so distorted by what I presume to be the acoustic properties of the underground chamber as to render them almost unrecognizable as such. The letter continues with a detail absent from Halverston's official report, a description of the brother's unusual physical characteristic. He wrote, "The elder speaks with what I would describe as excessive precision, each word chosen with deliberate care, yet his eyes never seem to focus directly upon the person he addresses. The younger bears unusual scarring about his throat and jaw, as though having survived some grave injury, and when he did speak, was rarely, his voice emerged as a whisper that seemed somehow divorced from the movement." Halverston concluded his letter with a statement of intent to report his concerns to authorities in Springfield upon the completion of his next surveying assignment, scheduled for April 1870. He wrote, "While I hesitate to cast aspersions upon those who showed me hospitality, I cannot shake the sense that something profoundly unwholesome transpires in that hollow. The collection of personal effects, the sounds from below, the manner in which they spoke of travelers who had passed through before me, all suggest practices that warrant investigation. The trail of documentation goes cold for nearly 5 months. Then, on April 7, 1876, a merchant from Harrison, Arkansas, named William Ledbetter, filed a missing persons report regarding his son Joseph, who had failed to return from a trading expedition to Springfield. According to the report, preserved in the Boone County Courthouse archives, Joseph Ledbetter had been traveling with a considerable sum in banknotes and trading goods, following the same route that would have taken him past what we now know was the Thornton property. William Ledbetter's report is notable for its detail. He described his son as a cautious and experienced traveler familiar with the hazards of mountain route. Joseph, 26 years old at the time of his disappearance, had made the journey between Harrison and Springfield no fewer than 14 times in the previous 3 years. William specifically noted that his son carried a Remington revolver and was known to be proficient in its use, suggesting that a simple robbery gone wrong seemed unlikely. Most significantly, William Ledbetter's report includes mention of a letter received from Joseph, posted from a small settlement 8 miles south of the Thornton property. In this final communication, dated March 30th, 1876, Joseph wrote of having been delayed by spring flooding along Buffalo Creek, but expected to complete his journey within the week. He also mentioned having encountered 2 unusual brothers who had offered him lodging for the night, but he had declined, finding something disquieting in their manner. This brief reference represents the last known documentation of Joseph Ledbetter. A search party was organized, but yielded no result. The case might have been forgotten, like so many frontier disappearances, had it not coincided with another incident that drew the attention of regional authorities. On April 23, 1876, a fire of suspicious origin destroyed a mercantile in Harrison. During the investigation, a witness reported seeing 2 men matching the Thornton brothers' description leaving town the morning before the fire. More significantly, the witness, a stable hand named Frederick Collins, claimed the men had in their possession a pocket watch he recognized as belonging to the missing Joseph Ledbetter. Collins' statement, recorded by local constable Hezekiah Parsons, includes several details that would later prove significant. He described the men as arriving in Harrison shortly after dawn, traveling with what he called an unusual wagon, more a mobile smokehouse conventional conveyance. Collins noted that the men sold cured meats to several businesses in town, including the Mercantile, that would burn the following day. He described the elder brother as conducting all transactions while the younger loaded and unloaded goods. Most tellingly, Collins reported observing what he believed to be bloodstains on the younger brother's boots and trousers, an observation he initially attributed to the men's trade, but later found suspicious. This report prompted the formation of a 5-man posse led by Deputy Marshal James Woodson. The posse departed for the remote regions northeast of Jasper on April 30th, 1876. Woodson's party included William Ledbetter, Frederick Collins, and 2 local guides familiar with the terrain. What they discovered was documented in Woodson's official report, filed May 8, 1870, a document that remained sealed in federal archives until 1963. According to Woodson's account, the Thornton cabin was initially found abandoned. Evidence suggested a hasty departure. Food remained on the table, clothing hung to dry. But it was what the posse discovered beneath the cabin that transformed a missing persons case into what Woodson described as a scene of such methodical depravity as to challenge the very notion of human capacity for evil. The cellar, accessed through the locked door that had disturbed Halverston, contained what Woodson clinically described as evidence of prolonged human captivity. Shackles had been affixed to the stone walls. A drainage channel had been meticulously carved into the earthen floor. Most disturbing were the modifications made to the structure. Sound-dampening materials lined the walls and ceiling, suggesting the brothers had gone to considerable lengths to ensure that whatever occurred in that subterranean chamber would not be heard from outside. Woodson's report notes the discovery of what he termed a rudimentary but effective system for the containment and processing of living subjects. The underground chamber had been divided into 3 distinct sections, a holding area where as many as individuals could be confined simultaneously. But Woodson described an examination space containing various measuring devices, and a third area the report describes only as the process. This final space connected to a narrow tunnel that led to a second structure approximately 100 yards from the main cabin, a building not visible. In one corner of the cellar, the posse discovered what Woodson described as a workshop of sorts. His report details finding specialized tools for what he called the processing of organic material. More telling was the discovery of personal effects belonging to at least 8 different individuals, including Joseph Ledbetter's distinctive silver money clip, still containing banknotes totaling $47. William Ledbetter, upon seeing his son's possession, reportedly attempted to burn the cabin to the ground. Woodson's report indicates that the posse prevented this, recognizing the importance of preserving evidence. Instead, they conducted a methodical search of the property, discovering what Woodson described as a veritable museum of personal effects, items that appear to have been categorized and displayed with unusual care. These included jewelry, correspondence, identification papers, and articles of clothing. Woodson noted that many items appeared to have been selected not for their monetary value, but for what he called their capacity to serve as mementos of individual lives. The posse tracked the brothers for 3 days, following a trail that led deeper into the mountains. On May 3rd, they discovered an even more remote structure, what Woodson described as less a cabin than a processing facility. Here, in a clearing approximately 6 miles from the main homestead, the documentary evidence suggests the brothers conducted the most disturbing aspects of their operation. This secondary location, situated near a natural spring that fed into a tributary of the Buffalo River, had been constructed with remarkable attention to specific requirements. Woodson noted the presence of large stone smoking chambers, preservation vats, and what he described as a series of specialized work surfaces designed for the efficient processing of organic materials. The building included a large stone hearth with various cooking implements, specialized cutting tools, and preservation equipment. Woodson's report becomes notably clinical at this point, employing the dispassionate language of a man attempting to maintain professional detachment. He notes finding a series of specialized tools, preservation equipment, and storage facility. What he carefully avoids stating explicitly, but which becomes clear through his inventory of evidence, is that the Thornton brothers had established a methodical operation for the harvesting and preservation of human remains. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of a ledger kept in Elijah Thornton's meticulous hand, detailing what appears to be a record of acquisition. The ledger, excerpts of which were included in Woodson's report, lists dates, brief descriptions of individuals, and notations regarding what Elijah referred to as yield. Between 1871 and 1876, the ledger documents 43 entries. The entries follow a consistent format, suggesting a methodical approach to what can only be described as predation. Each entry begins with a date, followed by a brief physical description of the individual, often including details such as approximate age, build, and distinguishing characteristics. This is followed by notations regarding the individual's belongings, which were apparently categorized according to potential value or utility. Most disturbing are the clinical assessments of what Elijah termed quality and yield, followed by detailed notes on preservation methods, and in some cases, what appear to be tasting notes. The posse never apprehended the Thornton brothers. The trail led to the Buffalo, where evidence suggested the men had constructed a raft. Woodson speculated they had traveled downstream, potentially making their way toward the Mississippi, though this was never. He included detailed physical descriptions, noting that Elijah, the elder, was approximately 45 years of age, stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, and spoke with what Woodson described as unusual precision and formality. Silas, the younger brother, was described as being in his late 30s, standing over 6 feet tall, distinctive scarring on his neck and lower jaw that Woodson he attributed to what appears to have been a severe burn or similar injury. Most notably, Woodson warned that the brothers should be considered exceptionally dangerous, not merely due to capacity for violence, but because of their demonstrated ability to present as ordinary, even hospitable individuals. The case might have faded into obscurity were it not for an unusual publication that appeared in 1897. Woodson's report concludes with a recommendation that federal authorities issue a multi-state alert for the apprehension of the Thornton brothers. A physician named Dr. Augustus Winters published what he called a study in isolated deviancy, the Thornton case. The monograph, printed privately and circulated primarily among medical professionals, claimed to contain interviews with individuals who had encountered the Thorntons in Louisiana in the years following their escape from Arkansas. Winters, who served as a physician in New Orleans during the 1880s, claimed to have developed an interest in the case after treating a patient suffering from what he termed acute nervous exhaustion following prolonged captivity. This patient, whom Winters would later identify only as H.M., provided an account that led the physician to connect the man's experience with reports of the Thornton brothers' activities in Arkansas. According to Winters, the brothers had established a small butcher shop in a remote parish west of New Orleans. Winters' account suggests that the brothers continued their practices for approximately 2 years before local suspicions grew concerning the origins of their meat. When authorities attempted to question them in late 1878, the brothers reportedly fled once again. What gives Winters' account particular credibility is his inclusion of details regarding the Thornton case were not publicly known at the time of his writing. His description of the specialized tools found at the secondary site matches Woodson's sealed report with remarkable accuracy. More disturbing is Winters' claim to have interviewed a man who had allegedly been held captive by the Thorntons, but escaped, a claim that, if true, would constitute the only known survivor of their practice. This survivor, identified only as H.M. in Winters' monograph, provided an account that correlates with physical evidence found at the Thornton property. H.M. described being kept in a below-ground chamber, fed a thin gruel at irregular intervals, and subjected to what he called examination. According to H.M., the brothers would regularly inspect their captives, checking muscle tone and physical condition. Those deemed ready would be removed from the cellar. H.M.'s account includes details that suggest the brothers operated according to specific criteria when selecting victims. According to Winters' documentation of these interviews, H.M. reported overhearing the brothers discussing what they termed quality indicators, specific physical characteristics they associated with desirable traits. H.M. recalled Elijah explaining to Silas that excess fat diminishes flavor, and that those who labor with their hands yield a superior product to those engaged in sedentary occupation. Perhaps most disturbing is H.M.'s recollection of Elijah's apparent scientific approach to their activity. H.M. reported that the elder brother maintained detailed notes on what he termed correlations between character and quality, apparently believing that certain personality traits manifested physically in ways that affected what he called the final product. H.M. recalled Elijah instructing Silas that fear improves tenderness but diminishes shelf life, suggesting a calculated approach to the treatment of captives. H.M. attributed his escape to what he called a rare moment of inattention on the part of Silas, who had been assigned to transport him from the main cabin to the secondary location. According to H.M.'s account, he managed to free himself from his restraints while being moved and fled into the dense. He reported traveling for 3 days without stopping, eventually reaching a small settlement where he collapsed from exhaustion. Local residents transported him to New Orleans, where he eventually came under Winters's care. Winter's publication caused a brief sensation in medical circles, but was quickly suppressed. Copies were reportedly collected and destroyed by federal authorities in 1898, with only 3 known copies surviving in private collection. One such copy was discovered in 1963 during the cataloging of materials donated to the University of Arkansas by the estate of Judge William Hartwell, who had presided over Boone County courts from 1892 to 1904. This rediscovery coincided with the unsealing of Woodson's original report, bringing renewed attention to the case. In 1964, a team from the University of Arkansas Department of Anthropology conducted an excavation of the Thornton property, by then long abandoned and reclaimed by forests. Their findings, published in a limited academic paper, confirmed many aspects of Woodson. The excavation, led by Dr. Eleanor, uncovered the foundations of both structures described. Using Woodson's report as a guide, the team was able to locate not only the main cabin site, but also the secondary processing facility. Despite nearly 90 years of forest, Dr. Pritchard's report notes that the stone foundation, the secondary structure, remained remarkably intact, preserved by the remote location and the durability of the materials used in structure. More significantly, the team discovered a series of 9 distinct burial sites on the periphery of the clearing surrounding the secondary structure. Analysis of the remains suggested that the victims had been subjected to what the report clinically termed systematic processing. The nature of this processing was not detailed in the published report, though internal university communications accessed during a 1967 review of the case indicate that the evidence suggested a pattern consistent with cannibalistic practice. Dr. Pritchard's unpublished field notes, made available to Research 68, include observations regarding what she termed a methodical approach to disposal. According to these notes, the burial sites contained primarily skeletal remains that showed evidence of precise butchery technique. Pritchard noted that certain bones were consistently absent from the burial sites, while others showed distinctive cutting patterns that she described as consistent with the systematic removal of muscle tissue. Most tellingly, Pritchard observed that the remains showed evidence of what she called cooking preparation, including cut marks consistent with jointing and portioning. What makes the Thornton case particularly disturbing is not merely the brothers' actions, but the methodical nature of their operation. Unlike other documented cases of frontier violence or even cannibalism, born of isolation and insanity, the evidence suggests the Thorntons had developed and organized the ledger, the specialized tools, the 2 distinct facilities, all point to a level of premeditation and planning rarely documented in such cases. The question of the brothers' ultimate fate remains unanswered. Winter's account places them in Louisiana until approximately 1878. A newspaper report from Galveston, Texas, dated July 1879, describes 2 brothers matching their description being sought in connection with the disappearance of a dockworker. After this, the documentary trail goes cold. In 1955, a partial skeleton was discovered during construction work in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Among the effects found with the remains was a pocket watch, later identified as having belonged to Joseph Ledbetter. The remains were estimated to date from the early 1880s, and analysis suggested the deceased had suffered a gunshot wound to the skull. Whether this represented one of the Thornton brothers, if so, which one, remains speculative. Forensic analysis of the remains, conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office, suggested the deceased was a male in his 50s at time of death, which would align with Elijah Thornton's projected age in the early 1880s. The report noted that the skeletal structure indicated a life of physical labor, and that the individual had suffered multiple healed fractures to the right hand and forearm. No corresponding records exist indicating whether Elijah Thornton had sustained such injury, leaving the identification tentative. More unsettling is the possibility that one or both brothers may have continued their practices elsewhere. A series of disappearances along the Gulf Coast between 1880 and 1885 bears certain similarities pattern established in the Ozarks. Though no definitive connection has been established, regional folklore from coastal Mississippi and Alabama includes accounts of strangers who would appear in remote communities, establish meat-selling operations, and disappear when local children began to go missing. Particularly notable is an account from the small fishing community of Bayou La Bate, Alabama. According to local newspaper records, in 1883, two brothers established what was described as superior smoked meat business, operating from a small smokehouse near the harbor. The men, who identified themselves as John and Robert Wilson, reportedly specialized in producing what they marketed as distinctive preserved meats of exceptional quality. They established a clientele among ship captains, providing provisions for vessels embarking on long voyages. According to the account published in the Mobile Register in December 1883, suspicions regarding the brothers arose when a local fisherman's daughter went missing after being seen speaking with the younger of the two men. When residents attempted to question the brothers, they discovered the smokehouse abandoned. Most disturbing was the subsequent discovery of what the newspaper described as personal effects belonging to at least 3 local residents who had been reported missing in previous months. The Thornton case represents a particular type of frontier horror, exploitation, isolation, and vulnerability in a landscape where disappearances could easily be attributed to natural hazard. The brothers operated in a region where travelers were dependent on the hospitality of strangers, where communication was limited, and where law enforcement was distant and often ineffective. What ultimately happened to Elijah and Silas Thornton? The most commonly accepted theory, based on the limited available evidence, is that they continued to move southward along the Gulf Coast, possibly into Mexico. A report from a British shipping agent in Veracruz, dated 1886, describes encountering 2 American brothers who operated a small meat-curing business catering to merchant vessels. The agent noted that the men were particularly selective about their clientele, preferring to sell to ships bound for distant ports. This is the last credible sighting of men matching the Thorntons' description. The agent, identified as Jeffrey Harrington, described the elder brother as speaking with unusual precision and noted that the younger brother bore significant scarring about the face and neck. Most tellingly, Harrington observed that the men's business operated from a remote location outside the main port and that they were reluctant to discuss the source of their materials or their methods of preparation. The case was officially closed in 1968 when the Department of Justice determined that no further investigation was warranted given the presumed death of all involved. The shipping agent's report, discovered in the archives of the British Foreign Office during research conducted in 1966, includes several details that align with known characteristics of the Thornton brothers. The physical evidence collected during the 1964 excavation was placed in storage at the University of Arkansas, where it reportedly remained until a fire destroyed portions of the anthropology department's storage facilities in 1972. According to university records, all materials related to the Thornton case were lost in this incident. Some researchers have questioned the coincidental nature of this fall, noting that it occurred shortly after Dr. Pritchard had announced plans to publish a comprehensive analysis of the Thornton case evidence. Pritchard herself expressed suspicion regarding the timing, though she never publicly alleged deliberate destruction of evidence. Her proposed book, tentatively titled The Butchers of Buffalo River, a forensic analysis of frontier predation, was never completed. Pritchard died in 1975, leaving her research notes to the University Archive, where they remain available to qualified researchers. Today, the location of the Thornton property lies beneath the waters of Beaver Lake, created by the damming of the White River in 1966. Whatever secrets might have remained in that soil are now submerged, preserved perhaps in the cold darkness of the artificial lake. The Thornton case persists primarily as an academic footnote, a rare documented instance of organized predatory behavior in the American frontier. Yet, for those familiar with the Ozarks, the story serves as a reminder of the darkness that once lurked in those remote hollows. Old-timers in Newton and Boone counties still speak of certain areas where the forest grows dense, where sounds don't carry as should, where even today experienced hikers are advised not to venture dark. In 1967, an elderly man in Harrison, Arkansas, claiming to be the grandson of Frederick Collins, the stable hand who had reported seeing the Thorntons with Joseph Ledbetter's watch, told a local historian that his grandfather had shared additional details never recorded in official documents. According to this account, Collins had actually encountered the Thorntons on multiple occasions and had found them unnervingly polite. Most disturbing was Collins's claim that the brothers had once offered him what they called special meat, prepared in a way that brought out the quality of the individual. Collins reportedly declined this offer, and after learning of the brothers' suspected activities, was haunted by how close he may have come to becoming part of their operation. According to his grandson, Collins refused to eat meat prepared by anyone outside his immediate family for the remainder of his life. The grandson, identified in the historian's notes as Jeremiah Collins, claimed that his grandfather had provided additional information to Deputy Woodson that was omitted from the official report. According to this account, Frederick Collins had observed the brothers on multiple occasions during their visits to Harrison. He reported that they typically arrived before dawn, conducted their business efficiently, and departed before noon. More significantly, Collins allegedly reported that the brothers always traveled with their distinctive wagon, which he described as being divided into compartments equipped with what appeared to be a small smokehouse. Most disturbing was Collins's claim that he had once observed Silas Thornton interacting with a local child, a boy of approximately 10 years, who had approached the wagon out of curiosity. According to this account, Elijah had quickly intervened, sending the child away while admonishing his brother in hushed tones. Collins reportedly told Woodson that the look that passed between the brothers in that moment had convinced him of their dangerous nature, though he had no concrete evidence of wrongdoing at that time. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Thornton case is what it reveals about the thin veneer of civilization. In the remote Ozarks of 1875, two men created a system for the hunting and processing of human beings, not as an act of desperation or temporary insanity, but as a sustained practice spanning at least 5 years and claiming dozens of victims. They operated within the broader community, interacted with locals and travelers alike, and maintained what witnesses described as calm, if awkward, demeanor. The brothers represent a particularly American horror, one born not of supernatural forces or ancient evils, but of the vast spaces of the frontier, where individuals could reinvent themselves, where accountability was limited, and where the disappearance of a traveler few questioned. They exploited the vulnerability inherent in the American dream of movement and opportunity, turning the traveler's dependence on strangers' hospitality into a mechanism for predation. In the ledger recovered from the Thornton property, the final entry, dated April 26, 1876, just days before the arrival of Deputy Woodson's posse, reads simply, "The curious surveyor returns, full circle completed." Whether Thomas Halverston, whose initial encounter brought the Thorntons to limited attention, returned to the property and fell victim to the brothers' remains unconfirmed. Halverston submitted his final survey reports on April 18, 1876, and was scheduled to return to St. Louis by month's end. He never arrived. His name does not appear in subsequent census records. Is there any documentation of his death? Like so many aspects of the Thornton case, Halverston's fate remains lost in the shadows of the Ozark Mountains, a place where, even today, certain hollows never fully emerge from darkness, where the old-growth forests absorb sound in a way that creates unnatural silence, and where local residents still speak of paths that should not be followed as the sun begins. In those remote hills, in that particular moment of American history, two brothers created their own isolated world, governed by appetites that defy conventional understanding. Their story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most profound horrors are not those that emerge from beyond the boundaries of known reality, but those that exist within the human capacity for calculated cruelty. When Beaver Lake was created, flooding the valley that once contained the Thornton property, some locals expressed relief that the waters would cover what one elderly resident called cursed ground. Yet others suggested that submerging the site merely concealed rather than cleansed, that the darkness associated with the brothers' activities remains preserved in the cold depths, a subtly malevolent presence felt by those who fish those waters or swim above what was once the Thornton Hollow. A local fisherman, interviewed for a regional newspaper in 1969, 3 years after the creation of the lake, reported what he called unusual disturbances while fishing in the vicinity of the submerged property. He described experiencing an unaccountable sense of dread and claimed that fish seemed to avoid the area. More concretely, he reported that his depth finder had revealed unusual structures on the lakebed that did not appear to be natural formation. When asked if he would return to the location, the fisherman reportedly said, "Not for all the base in Arkansas. Some things are best left undisturbed." The waters of Beaver Lake reach depths of over 200 feet in some areas. Somewhere in that darkness lie the remnants of a chapter in Ozark history that most would prefer to forget, a reminder that in the most beautiful landscapes, in the most seemingly peaceful settings, darkness can take root and flourish when isolation removes the constraints of communal oversight. And perhaps, as some local folklore suggests, that darkness never truly dissipates. The Ozarks remain a place of contradiction, of breathtaking natural beauty and hidden histories, of welcoming communities and isolated hollows where strangers are still viewed with instinctive suspicion. In these mountains, the past is never quite buried, merely submerged, waiting beneath still waters. In 1968, a hiker discovered a small cave in the limestone bluffs overlooking what is now Beaver Lake. Inside, scratched into the stone wall, were what appeared to be names, 43 in total. According to the report filed with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, the names corresponded with remarkable accuracy to the time period of the Thornton case, though no direct connection was ever established. The cave, located approximately 2 miles from the submerged Thornton property, contained no other evidence of human activity. When researchers returned to document the site more thoroughly in 1970, they discovered that the entrance had collapsed, rendering the interior inaccessible. Whether this collapse was natural or deliberate has never been determined. Today, the Thornton case exists primarily in academic archives and local folklore. Occasional articles appear in historical journals or regional publications, typically focusing on the methodical nature of the brothers' operation rather than the lurid details of their practice. What remains consistent across these varied accounts is the recognition that Elijah and Silas Thornton represent a particular type of frontier predator, individuals who exploited the vulnerabilities inherent in a developing society to create a sustained operation that claimed dozens of victims before detection. Perhaps most chilling is the recognition that had Deputy Woodson's posse arrived even a few days later, the brothers might have escaped without leaving the substantial evidence that documented their activities. The ledger, the specialized tools, the modifications to their property, all would have been lost to history, and the disappearances attributed to the natural hazards of frontier travel. It raises the unsettling question of how many similar operations might have existed in remote regions during this period of American expansion, their activities never documented, their victims forever unnamed. In the end, the Thornton case serves as a reminder that the most profound horrors often emerge not from supernatural forces or external threats, but from the darker aspects of human nature, given freedom to express themselves in environments where accountability is limited and isolation provides opportunity and in the remote hollows of the Ozarks, two brothers created a world governed by their own a microcosm of predation that operated undetected for years before chance circumstances brought their activities to light. Today, Beaver Lake is a popular recreation area, its clear waters attracting boaters, fishermen, and swimmers. Few of those who enjoy its placid surface are aware of what lies beneath, not merely the physical remnants of the Thornton property, the darker history that the waters concealed when they rose to fill the valley in 1960s. Perhaps there is a metaphor, this submersion, the way in which communities often prefer to cover rather than confront the darker aspects of their histories. Yet, as any resident of the Ozarks will tell you, what is buried does not always remain so. The region is characterized by its karst topography, a landscape of limestone riddled with caves and underground streams where what disappears in one location often emerges unexpectedly in another. Perhaps the same could be said of history itself, particularly those aspects we prefer to forget. They may submerge for a time, but eventually find their way back to the surface, demanding acknowledgement. The Thornton brothers vanished into history, their ultimate fate unknown. But the documentation of their activities remains, preserved in archives, academic papers, and the persistent folklore of the Ozark Mountain. Their story serves as a reminder that even in the most beautiful landscapes, darkness can take root when allowed to flourish unchecked. In those remote hollows where silence hangs heavy among the ancient trees, the past is never fully buried, merely waiting, like the still waters of Beaver Lake, concealing what lies beneath.